Sir Desmond Swayne. He's a Tory MP, he's former International Development Minister. And Sir Desmond, you share a lot of certainly my and other people's concerns about this rule of six. It was brought in by statutory instrument overnight at midnight. I think 23 minutes we got to see the legislation before it actually came into force. Sets up a different situation from England from Scotland and Wales, where children are under 12 are exempt from that count of six. What do you make of the decision to bring in that rule, and why are you unhappy with it?
Well, I'm principally unhappy because I disagree with it. I don't like the intrusion into our individual liberty. But as you say, brought in overnight, not having seen the legislation before, we're supposed to live in a democracy. All of a sudden, our liberties are being taken away. We are being subjected to new rules that have never been debated in Parliament. Now, let's say if this legislation had gone through in the proper way, what would have happened is it would never have survived in its present form. It would have been amended so that children were excluded, as they are in Wales and in Scotland. But nevertheless, we would have at least had a debate. We would have had a democratic process. What outrages me is that these things are being done without actually any consultation with elected representatives. I never got to vote on it. I never debated it.
And that is the big issue, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of people, including me, were actually happy to accept a lot of the legislation early on in the pandemic when we were in an emergency situation. People got very panicked, and I think there are big question marks now about whether some of those decisions were the right ones. But I completely understand the justification at the time. Now we're told we are facing a second wave, and we've got this rising number of cases, over 3,000 positive coronavirus tests 3 days running, and that we need to act again, act fast. And there's warnings from, for instance, the Peter Openshaw, Professor of Experimental Medicine at Imperial. It's another one, and various other warnings that we've had this weekend. But there's also an awful lot of counter-evidence. There's evidence about what happened in Sweden and showing that their case level is now much, much lower. There's big question marks about whether or not there will be a second wave. Big question marks about whether we've now got what's called a case-demic, where we're finding cases, but virtually all of them are false positives, where actually it's people with traces of the virus who are young people. They not only are they not going to get ill, they can't even pass it on to anyone else because these are traces of the virus from 6 months ago. So now there are an awful lot more people questioning what we call the science, in capital T, capital S, is that clearly there isn't the science. There are different scientific viewpoints, and perhaps a lot of us would like more scientific viewpoints to be taken into account.
Last week, when the Secretary of State made his statement, I asked him if there was not a scintilla of doubt in his mind about this other scientific case that is being made. And his reply was that no, there wasn't any doubt. But my point comes back to the democratic one. I accept that I might be in a minority in my skepticism about the current science. But minorities consent to be governed by a majority in a democracy because at least their voice was heard and they had their say and their vote was counted. And what is so annoying about the situation now is that these things are not being debated in our free and democratic parliament. The government isn't making its case on why it's relying on a particular scientific establishment and excluding the other evidence. And I want to see that debate take place and at least know that, hey, well, if I lost the vote, that's democracy.
And this is the worry, isn't it? That we were looking lots of these decisions early on. There are people who've disagreed all the way along. They've either said we shouldn't have locked down, or as Sweden didn't do, or we should have locked down sooner, or whatever. But that's the key thing is that we need to be hearing all the different evidence, and we know that the government still seems to be holding on to these Imperial College models, these computer models, which we're aiming to predict what could happen. We all remember that 250,000, even 500,000 deaths if we don't lock down, and then it emerged that actually that was if there was no social distancing, no mask wearing, no nothing, or no at all, and more hand washing. When of course we were already doing that a couple of weeks before we locked down, but also. It's the reliance on computer models when we've actually got case history, real live case history from not just from other countries, but from coronavirus pandemics in the past, so your SARS, your MERS and the like, which we can rely on.
Well, the Imperial College model was also applied to what was going to happen in Sweden on the basis of the policy that they'd adopted.
Yeah.
And it got it completely wrong. And when it comes to real life cases, in July, 5 times more people died of flu in the United Kingdom. Bear in mind, it is not the flu season. 5 times more people died of flu than of COVID-19. Now, I think we need a sense of proportion, and we need to have the government actually justify the policies that it's pursuing.
Can I also ask you about a call from the NHS chiefs in England? They're writing a letter to all GPs telling them to give face-to-face appointments for those who need them, particularly elderly people, those with chronic problems or many different problems. But it's very easy for me. I need to. I much prefer the fact that I can now just email my doctor and get a response very quickly. Here's your prescription. Off you go. I don't have to bother queuing up and waiting for an appointment. But for many people with chronic issues, they really do need that face-to-face time. And basically saying to GPs, you're in breach of contract. You need to start seeing your patients. Millions of patients around the country not getting a chance of having an appointment face to face with their doctor. What do you make of that? Because it's a real concern that basically anything non-COVID is not currently getting treated.
Well, even the government statistics are suggesting that 26,000 people have died because they didn't get the treatment that they would otherwise have had there not been this concentration on COVID, and that a further 16,000 will die in the next few months in addition. So I'm entirely with the government in demanding that GPs provide face-to-face appointments and encourage people who have a suspicion that they are unwell. And to be fair, the Secretary of State has been trying to do that, encourage them to come forward, not to sit on their symptoms. But I'm with you, actually. I think medicine has probably changed for the long term, in that for many of us, it is more convenient to be able to email our doctor and say, here, do I need to come in? And only if you need to come in, would you come in? And I think that will be better in the long run for those people who do need to see the doctor physically, because there'll be more scope and more room for them to do so.
Can I also ask you, just finally, before I let you go, what you make of the rows over the internal markets bill? I mean, it sounds deathly dull, but it's become a big storm front page of the newspapers the last few days over this. Sir Geoffrey, I always give him a knighthood. Geoffrey Cox definitely just should have a knighthood, shouldn't he? Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, has caused an unconscionable damage to the UK's reputation in the world by us undermining international law, by breaching the Withdrawal Agreement. Do you agree that this is a big risk, along with others, John Major, Theresa May, Lord Howard, Tony Blair, all say this is a terrible, terrible thing to do?
It's utter tosh. Look at the European Union's record of abrogating international agreements and rulings, particularly with the World Trade Organization. International obligations that it's under and it's made that it's frankly ignored. Everyone watching will see what is going on. We are taking a precaution against an explicit threat that has been made to us in the trade negotiations. If you don't give way and let those trade negotiations proceed along the way that we, the EU, would want them to proceed, you know what we will do. If it comes to the fact that there's no trade deal at the end of the day, we'll exclude your trade from Northern Ireland. We're taking a proportionate measure against the possibility of that threat. This bill doesn't break any international obligation at all. It's purely a precaution against those circumstances arising. And everyone else in the world will see what's going on. And to make these fatuous comparisons that, how on earth can we do this and then criticize China for what it's doing in Hong Kong, to make that kind of comparison shows the bankruptcy of your argument.
Sir Desmond Swayne, I couldn't agree with that more, I have to say. Thank you very much indeed.